Hey friends, I'm Jess Connolly. I'm an author, a coach, a Bible teacher, and a local church leader, and I love talking to real people who know what it means to have full lives, but also want to walk in abundance. This podcast is for you. It's not my podcast, it's ours. It's for people who crave lighthearted conversations and deeply spiritual truth. It's for people who are busy, tired, waiting, growing, dreaming, working, or praying about what's next. Wherever you're listening from, if it's quiet, mundane, or busy, I am praying for you, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's go. Jessica Turner, I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for the years I've gotten to know you and watch you love people through your words and through your work online, but also watching you love yourself these last few years has been such a gift. So I just want to say thank you for that. And thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Gosh, thanks so much for having me. I am really, really honored to be here.
It's literally my joy, my privilege to have you. I want to just immediately dive in to talking about this book. And I hit this place really early on in reading where you kind of describe who this book is for. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, man, I want to just even say some of these words out loud. You kind of give this short little list in the beginning of, I thought it would be better than this. And you say, this is for anyone who maybe is experiencing the loss of a loved one, the ending of a marriage, an unfulfilling job, a health diagnosis, a financial hardship, feelings of loneliness, parenting challenges, or an accident or a life-changing incident. And I think I wanted to ask you this as you were writing this and as you were processing these words and being so generous to not only tell your story, but to provide a guide for women or any people at all who find themselves in these situations. Can you think of very many people in your life who couldn't fit any of those descriptors?
No, I can't.
I couldn't either.
I mean, I really, what was naive of me 6 years ago, before my marriage ended, my husband came out. We had 3 kids. I've been married for 16 years, and we lovingly made the choice to divorce. And prior to that, I think I would have been like, oh, that book is for other people I know, but that book isn't for me.
Yeah.
How nice it was to live with those rose-colored glasses. But what I know to be true is that disappointment finds us all. It's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think that this book is a gift for all of us who feel one of those things on that list that you just read, but also something that we can feel really safe in giving to somebody else going through those things. And I think for me, when I was walking through my divorce, I felt like there were very few resources that I could grab onto where I would both feel seen and there was something I could practically grab onto and apply to my life. And I think I thought it would be better than this is both of those things, which is something I'm really proud of.
It is. It is both of those things. It is, again, such a generous work. And it's interesting, as I read it, well, I've told you this, but when I got the advanced copy in my email, which, for women like us is a very often occurrence. I'm getting an email or a book, most weekdays to read. But I got an advanced copy of this in my email and I started reading just the PDF version and I could not stop. I could not put it down. So this will be the first time you guys hear me say this in the podcast episode, but it won't be the last. As you're listening, you just go ahead and flicker on your phone and head on over to Amazon. You can click the link in our show notes, but go ahead and grab that copy of I Thought It Would Be Better Than This, because you'll start reading and you won't really be able to stop. But I think what grabbed my heart so much about it is that, I don't know, I want you to talk. We need to hear your words. But if I could tell you my perspective of why, I think even that day, I think I kind of immediately texted you and said, we've got to talk about this book. Please come on the podcast. But I think why it hit me is because I sense that a lot of women in our generation, in our age range, this 35 to 45, 35 to 50, a lot of us kind of tracked together of stepping into the world and being brave and using what we had for the good of others and being about God's glory and moving forward. And I think a lot of us collectively are experiencing a breaking and a disappointment that is genuinely devastating. And I think for all of us, it is looking different, but I really don't know a woman who is in that age range that isn't dealing with some kind of death of a dream. This is what I thought it was going to be like. And now it is really broken. And so, yeah, I think I was curious, like, is that your experience too? Are we all just kind of in this together?
So, something that was really important to me as I was writing, I thought it would be better than this, was to make sure that people felt seen. And so I conducted focus groups. And I had about 50 women who were all from my community. You can find me mostly on Instagram these days. And I just put a story up and said, hey, would anyone be willing to read the first 6 chapters of my book and tell me what you think? And what I found was that no matter what the circumstance was, that list that you read was birthed out of those focus groups of these were the types of things that people were saying. And I think that it is frankly not honest to say you haven't thought to yourself in some way, I thought it would be better than this. But that feels like a very scary sentence to say. Because, and particularly perhaps in the Christian space, for whatever reason, that, there's a lot of women struggling to kind of seem all put together. And, you've got the great family and the great spouse and the great job and all the things. But actually, things are a hot mess.
Yeah.
And there is something or several things in your life where you're like, gosh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So I'd like to say this is not a divorce book, although the story is about my divorce and my finding of myself. That is just the thread that I use to help equip women to take an honest look at their disappointment, name it, name the disappointments adjacent to that main disappointment, and then move forward. I think so often when we're disappointed in something, we just put a period on it.
Yeah.
I got cancer, period.
Yeah.
My husband came out, period. I got divorced, period. Instead of my husband came out and I got divorced, comma, and da 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 da, right? Like our disappointment doesn't have to be the end of the story. Anne Voskamp is a very close friend of mine, and she was one of the friends who walked me through this season of despair. And I remember her saying to me one day, I would call her crying every single day as I would drive to work. And I have said to her since then, I don't know why you were such a good friend to me. Like if I had a friend crying every single day, I think it would have messed with me. She was just so steady and earnest and good to me in that season. And she would say to me often, Jess, you aren't writing all the lines of the story. You can't control what Matthew is saying or doing or needs, but you hold the pen to write the lines of your story.
Oof.
And that was something that I just held on to. I wrote about it in the book. I've thought about almost every day, probably for the past 6 years, is how can I write a story that I'm proud of? How can I write my lines well? People might do things to me and say things to me, and I might get hurt. But how can I respond in a way that I'm proud of, that is helping me heal, that's helping me grow, that's helping me love better? And that was something that was very, very helpful to me. And so I just hope that people who read, I thought it would be better than this, feel seen and feel empowered.
You have done that so well. And I actually want to come back to that in a moment because I have a follow-up question for you about that. But can I tell you one thing that I just put together about why I think this book hit me so personally, other than the fact that I am very often finding myself saying right now, I thought it would be better than this. When you were talking about kind of, especially the focus groups, I realized I think why the title and the writing and the tools you offer, and it feels so poignant for me, is because I feel like I flipped in a very short amount of time from, I really don't deserve any of this. I can't believe my life looks like this in a positive way to, I cannot believe my life looks like this in a negative way.
Mm.
And that happened almost overnight for me.
Yeah.
And I really, anyone who listens to the podcast knows, and you know, I've shared with you a little bit, the last 15 months of our life have just been hit after hit after hit in pain. And I would say really before like that, the first big crisis for us, which was my husband's mental health crisis, before that, I lived most days thinking like, I think God has tripped and accidentally tossed me into somebody else's life. I should not be getting to like live out the dream in so many ways. It really quickly, it felt like all of a sudden the dream became a nightmare.
Going from it being a dream to it being a nightmare. I think for some, disappointment is like that, where it happens at like the blink of an eye. And for others, it's really slow. I've also thought a lot about just the idea that there's going to be some people who see me or listen to me on these podcasts, or they see the book and they're like, oh, it must be nice. Like she went from getting divorced in 2020 and now like she's got a book out. She's got quote unquote all the answers. I've been dating someone for a year. Like she's found love, like la di da, like that must be so great. And I think that it's important for us to remember that there is no like one singular timeline for grief and disappointment. I mean, my marriage was not great for a lot of years before Matthew came out to me. And I thought it had to do with me. And some of the stuff that I've been working on in therapy is literally stuff that was probably formed in narratives that I created in my head in like 2006. So we're talking 20 years of stuff that I have like just finally excavated and worked through. And so I just think it's important to acknowledge that there's no singular timeline. Grief doesn't have like these 5 stages and then we're fine. Like our grief and our wounds and our disappointments become scars, and scars are tender, Jess. You know, like scars don't mean you're fully healed. Like there's a scar because it's different than what it was. And our disappointment shapes us and makes us different. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes in big ways. I tell a story in the book about having a hysterectomy, and I had terrible endometriosis and had my uterus and one ovary removed, and then the endometriosis didn't clear. And so a couple of years later, I had to go back in and had my appendix taken out and more scar tissue was formed. And sometimes my right side really aches, even though I don't have an ovary there anymore. And I went to the doctor and said, I'm having all this pain and like, there's nothing there. Like it's the spot where you took my appendix out, my ovaries, nothing. Like there's literally no organs on that side of my body. What is going on? And she said, that's definitely your scar tissue. And, you know, occasionally scars will hurt. She said, do you have any stress in your life right now? And I said, well, actually, and I had just finished writing the book. And so I told her a little bit about that. And she said, well, see how you do in the next month. Sometimes our bodies are telling us that there's something wrong or that we're stressed, and it flares up in our scars. And I thought, wow, how profound is that for life, right?
Yeah. So good. Okay. I do want to kind of flip to, well, I have 2 follow-up questions because you've already just shared so much wisdom. I'm genuinely just curious. I've been wondering this for a while. Have you ever experienced the phenomenon of when someone gets pregnant or when someone has their first baby, or maybe even, unfortunately, devastatingly, when someone has their first miscarriage, and they'll say, maybe they'll go online or maybe they'll go to a women's group and they'll say, why is nobody talking about this? Like, why is nobody talking about the fact that breastfeeding's hard? Or why is nobody talking about the fact that miscarriage is so hard? Or why is nobody talking about the fact that you're so tired when you have a newborn? This is a conversation I encounter a lot because our church, our community is a lot of women younger or like a couple steps behind me in life stage. So most of my friends, if they have kids, their kids are very young. And I'll think like, no, everybody's talking about that. You just weren't paying attention. You weren't paying attention to the conversation, you know? But did you have a sense when you were walking through this, and maybe even when you were writing the book, that you were like, why didn't the women coming before us talk about this? And do you think maybe they were and we didn't hear them, or that we didn't want to hear them?
I think certainly we have talked about grief and lament. It is as old as time, right? But I think that it's one of those things that if you have not gone through it, you cannot fully appreciate it,
Yeah.
or it's not the thing you're listening to. So, to use your example, I'm right now with a 16, a 13, and a 10-year-old. I'm not listening to conversations around breastfeeding and breast pumps and how to make sure my baby's getting all the right things, right? Because that's not what I need. Likewise, it wasn't until I was going through my own grief story that I recognized that this was something I didn't have knowledge about how to navigate. And I was grasping
Mm,
for any sort of wisdom and insight and knowledge on how to do this. Now, I will say, I don't understand how we go to school and we learn about chemistry and quadratic equations and things that we will never navigate. Our kids are not being taught how to navigate disappointment and what to do
right.
and how to
Right.
look at ourselves introspectively, you know? And so I do wonder, as those of us who are experiencing this now in midlife and are talking about it, if that will change things. You know,
Yeah.
it's like my kids know the term gaslighting and use it correctly. My
Yeah.
daughter will say, he's gaslighting me, talking about her brothers. And you know what? She's not wrong. So,
Yep.
like we do better, right?
Yep.
But I think that some of these conversations have been happening. Certainly, as I
Yeah.
was researching for the book, I found some of them.
Mm,
But I also think being vulnerable is scary.
yeah.
And I think that the idea of being vulnerable has gotten to be more acceptable.
Mhm.
And because it has gotten more acceptable, it is more at the forefront of conversations that we're seeing and we're getting exposed to it. And so people might be more aware of these conversations happening so that when they need it, they're like, oh, you're going through a divorce. This
Yeah.
influencer I follow, Jessica Turner, she went through a divorce and she wrote something, like that we do have a bit more awareness of it. But some of it is probably also the advent of social media and what that is doing as well.
Yeah. I'm working on it because something I thought about my own life is that I really want to be a life speaker. And so, staying with the new mom scenario, the new mom metaphor, I've never wanted to be the gal at a baby shower saying, like, just you wait, it's going to be so hard. I've always wanted to be the mom with older kids saying, like, it's going to be great. You're going to love it. God's mighty in you. It's going to be so beautiful, because everybody else is telling them how hard it is. But on the flip side, I am trying to lovingly tell some of my friends who have, 8-year-old kids, 9-year-old kids, not like, hold on, it's going to get so hard, but like, I would like you to prepare yourself for the fact that all of this parenting actually, does lead to them leaving you and you sending them. And that, in the best case scenario, is difficult and devastating. That's a happy scenario of sending your kids into the next season. But for many of us, like, what comes next as far as parenting teenagers? And then from what I've heard, parenting adults is much harder than parenting teenagers as they begin to really experience life and pain and circumstances. And so I don't know. I'm trying to balance being a life speaker and also saying, when you're ready for this information, I'll be here.
I think being a friend that is a safe place for people to land is a real gift.
Yeah.
I was thankful that in my story, I had friends like my friend Anne and Angie and others who were there for me and
Yeah.
that I could sit with in my sorrow and that they were safe. I think it is important to know who those people are in our lives
Yeah.
and that they can hold space for our
Yeah.
sorrow and we're not going to have to deal with their emotions around it. I know in my story, that was something that was challenging because Matthew and I felt like we couldn't talk to our families about it because they were going to get so emotional,
Sure.
rightfully so.
Yeah.
But we were too fragile to hold their emotions with our own in real
Yeah.
time. And so that was something that we had to be really measured about. And I'm glad that we did it, even though it was hard to not go to some of those people that were really close to us.
Yeah. So good. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about dreaming. You have so much wisdom and insight on the book, not just in processing your disappointment, not just in processing and naming the thing that is making you look at your life and saying, I thought it would be better than this. But you obviously shift in the book to talking about how to move forward. And you have this one quote where you say, grief is a thief and can make it feel like we don't have permission to dream again. But that couldn't be further from the truth. You do get to dream. And whatever your disappointment, it is not the end. And it's interesting, as Nick and I have walked through this year, I've noticed that it's been really easy for him to dream in the midst of disappointment. And it's actually been really important for him to dream in the midst of disappointment. It's been essential and it's been good for him. And it's been a lot harder for me to access coming up with a new dream, especially for some of the dreams or some of the pictures that I had of our life that won't come back anymore. I'd love to just hear any insight about some of what that looked like for you, like some of what the new dreams have looked like for you.
Gosh, that's a beautiful question. I think for me, I had to dream about different areas of my life because when my marriage ended, my marriage had touched all of those areas. So I had to give myself permission to dream. I had always wanted to be a full-time entrepreneur. And I remember my best friend Angie saying to me, Jess, the dream of your marriage died. We cannot let the dream of this job die as well.
That was literally one of my favorite quotes in the book. I was cheering and whooping and I loved it. Keep going. I'm sorry. I don't want to stop you.
And so, I had dreams around what it would look like to be a full-time entrepreneur. And also knowing that dream that I'd had for a long time, it originally was shaped with the idea of having a partner. And instead, I was not reshaping this dream that I was still going to be a full-time creator and author and speaker, but I was going to be doing it by myself, right? I wasn't going to have anyone else to fall back on. And then there was the dream of being in an intimate relationship with someone. The original dream was that Matthew and I would grow old together, that we would have a 50, 60-year marriage. And that dream died. And so I had to give myself permission first to dream about what it would be like to love someone else. I had to then dream about what it could look like to start life new with somebody and everything kind of around that. And there's dreams that, you can't even quite form yet because you don't know who that person's going to be. Some of your dreams in relationship happen when you have a person, right? So some of those dreams I couldn't even formulate. And then I think it was just like a general dream of satisfaction instead of sorrow in my life. Because what happened is my marriage ended and I just had so much sadness. One of the focus group comments was, you cry a lot. I was like, well, I did cry a lot. Like, I don't know how to tell those stories without also talking about my tears because I was just so sad. I remember calling Angie and being like, just tell me it's not going to always be like this. And it still chokes me up to think about myself being so sad and just wanting someone to give me hope. Sorry to get choked up.
No.
And her being like, Jess, I don't know when, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know it's not going to always be like this.
Yeah.
And I knew that I could trust her in saying that because for those of you that don't know Angie Smith, her daughter Audrey had a diagnosis that was incompatible with life when she was pregnant with her. And I was pregnant with my Elias at the same time. And Audrey lived just a short couple hours and I was still pregnant. And I remember holding Audrey and Elias was kicking in my stomach and how hard that was. But we have walked with each other through these hard times. So I knew that I could trust her because I had watched her heal and have joy again. And so I knew that in my saddest moments when I felt like I wasn't going to have joy again, I needed somebody who was a little further down the path to say, no, I know that this is not the end of your story. And I'm so grateful for that. The audiobook of I Thought It Would Be Better Than This, Angie and I have a conversation that's like a bonus just in the audiobook where we talk about being a friend to somebody in disappointment and what that looks like, and some stories from our own personal interactions. That's really special. But I just needed to have a bigger imagination. And I think it's really hard when you're disappointed to have a big imagination for what life could be. I finished writing the first draft of this book in March of 2024. And so it's been almost a year, and I have grown even since I wrote this. And I felt fully whole and alive and full of so much encouragement for my readers. And even now, a year further, I feel more firm in my footing of the beauty that my life is now that I couldn't imagine. In so many ways, I feel like it is even more beautiful than I could imagine when I finished writing these words. And I think that is such a gift. And I think because of the sorrow that I've experienced, it's one that I hold with a lot of tenderness and care and gratitude. And I think that comes with somebody who has experienced great loss. And I just feel so grateful for that beauty.
Oh, I'm so proud of you. I'm so grateful to have read your words and even to just get to watch this story keep unfolding, because you're so generous, not just to share in the book, but to share your life online. I want to read one last quote from the book, and I want to ask you to just kind of give us some parting words for women who might hear this and find themselves. You say near the end of the book, my husband's coming out could have made me not trust people. My divorce could have made me anti-marriage. My divorce could have made me think I had to stick with a traditional corporate job. My divorce could have made me think I couldn't travel alone, but it didn't. And that is because I said I wanted something more. I will not let this control my life. What happened to me is not going to define me. My grief will not be my story. My story will be one of hope, healing, and betterment of myself. I'm proud of myself and the story I've written, and you can be proud of your story too. I'm curious if you could just send us off with maybe some words of encouragement to fight for someone who's listening, who maybe had any of those circumstances we listed in the beginning, any of those hardships, and they are hearing you say, like, it didn't have to end like this. It didn't have to be over. I didn't have to wind up more bitter, but it sure would be easy. Would you just give us some kind of parting words, encouragement to fight, to keep going, to not let the disappointment define us?
I think that it is important to remember that it takes just as much energy to be joyful as it does to be sad, to be grateful as it does to be mad, to have hope as it does to feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And so if I can be someone that you look to and say, if she could be hopeful when that happened, if she could find love again when she thought she never would, if she could do it, so can I. I hope that that is of encouragement to you. I fought to have an imagination for a life that was beautiful again, that didn't feel like I was looking at a battlefield of woundedness, because that's what I felt for a long time. That when I thought about my life, it was like I was at war and the battle was over and I was just looking at just wounds and death and disappointment everywhere. And instead, I now feel like I look at my life with so much possibility and beauty, like it's like a tulip field full of all those colors of possibility for my life. And so know that it takes, it's peony season right now. This is probably a good place for me to end. And peonies are my favorite flower. They're these big, gorgeous flowers with lots of petals, and their lifespan is quite short. And the most beautiful peony seasons happen after the hardest winters. Peonies really thrive in cold, and what looks to be awful, brutal winters is actually the start of what's going to be the most beautiful flower. So if you're in that winter right now, just know that that winter is forging something really beautiful, and that spring and light and growth always happens if we are open to it.
Yeah. Thank you, God. Friends, I cannot encourage you enough to go to Amazon, go to wherever you buy books, and grab a copy of I Thought It Would Be Better Than This. You're going to devour it the same way I did. Jessica, we're just so incredibly thankful for your work. We're so incredibly thankful for your leadership and for your generosity in sharing your story. Bless you and thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Friends, I'm so grateful you listened to today's episode. Thanks for spending time with me. It would mean the world to me to connect with you. So you can send me a DM on Instagram at Jess A. Connolly or head to my website, jessconnolly.com for more ways to connect. If you have a minute to subscribe and leave a review of the podcast wherever you listen, it would massively help us reach more people with the good news that they can live fully awake. Let's go.